Former New South Wales Nationals leader John Barilaro, that big New York job he created when a minister in the government. More fallout today from the parliamentary inquiry into how he ended up being appointed after he left office. This damning letter from his former Chief of Staff, Mark Connell, was read out. Now, according to Connell, Barilaro told him he would create the New York trade job for himself to ensure he had a job to go to after he left politics, allegedly saying that the Trade Commissioner's postings were an opportunity to get the F out of the place. Joining me now, Sky News Queensland editor Peter Gleeson, for this and a whole lot more. Gleeson, John Barilaro has rejected these claims today, but he did create the role, that's a fact. He did end up getting it, that's a fact, after, of course, it had been offered to somebody else. The word from his former staffer appears to ring true. Now, it's going from bad to worse, isn't it?
Well, it's a classic case, Peter, of a job for the boys gone wrong. Now, in Barilaro's defence, there are many examples where former politicians have landed plum trade roles elsewhere. I mean, former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie was appointed to the LA Trade Commissioner's role on about $400 a year when he left politics. So it's not unprecedented for this to happen. But the testimony today of his former Chief of Staff is incredibly damning, and it just doesn't pass the pub test. The problem for Barilaro is that this type of disingenuous, unctuous, odious behaviour in many respects probably disqualifies him for other jobs further down the track. Now, he's been touted as a possible Greyhound Racing New South Wales CEO. I mean, the board would be very loath to appoint him with this type of stench around his character. So Barilaro, who I think was a pretty effective politician during his time, he's dug himself a pretty big hole here.
I think the issue is he created the job that he then left the parliament and got. And there was a process now that's not standing up to scrutiny. It's not the issue that a former politician's got the job. I do think some warrant these sorts of jobs, but you've got to have a transparent process. And most of them who get the jobs didn't actually create it in the first place. I think that's the problem. A really big issue today, it broke this afternoon, this foot and mouth confirmation. It's got two parts to it. We've learnt that a traveller was coming back from Indonesia, tried to bring in undeclared beef. The beef was tested, it was found to have foot and mouth. Okay, caught at the border. We don't know which airport that was found in, but it wasn't an Australian airport. Then we've got this other issue down in Victoria. They were doing this routine inspection of foodstuffs in a shop, and they find in-pork products for sale in a Melbourne CBD store, imported from China this time. There was foot and mouth. Now, all these products, of course, have been destroyed, but I tell you, there is huge anger out there in the ag sector that the Federal Minister, Murray Watt, their sense is he's asleep at the wheel, very little confidence that he's doing enough. And I have to say this, Gleeson, and I say this to the Prime Minister's office in Canberra, you guys are going to take this over. You have to put this on 100%. The PM's desk immediately. Do not leave this with this minister who's been there 2 minutes and grew up in the suburbs of Brisbane, wouldn't know a farm if he fell over it. If this gets in, forget COVID and everything else, this is a huge issue. It's bigger than the COVID, outbreak number 3 we're trying to deal with. So what needs to happen, Gleeson? I'd shut the border, to be honest.
Yeah, I think shutting the border is definitely an option. Let's deal with Senator Murray Watt. I mean, he's a left-wing, factional head kicker. Donald Duck would know more about the agricultural industry than he would. So I don't know how the hell he got the ag portfolio. It must have been some sort of carve-up that the left wanted or something. But yes, we have to look at biosecurity provisions within the Indonesian government. I mean, there has to be stricter, greater controls at the border, because right now it's very obvious that this is a time bomb waiting to happen. And as you say, this is the greatest threat to the agricultural industry since the ban on export live trade. I mean, and when you think about COVID and you think about what happened to the regional industries and industries in the bush during that period, how they were basically closed down, this is a bigger threat. And so Murray Watt needs to march on down to Anthony Albanese's office tomorrow morning and say, listen, mate, we got a real problem here. We need to pump as much staff, personnel, resources into the Indonesian government biosecurity system so that we actually stop this happening. Because if it happens, if it spreads, gee, you know, you're going to see a lot of people go to the wall.
And let's not forget it's pigs, it's sheep, it's everything else. I mean, I'm not saying shut the border permanently, but the issue is the source country, Indonesia, doesn't have anywhere near the biosecurity we do, nor the public
Correct.
funding. And we know we've got cows wandering on the streets of Bali. You know, it's not going to be hard for someone to bring this home. It can survive for 24 hours plus in dirt and other things on shoes. I'd shut the borders just to give us time to send the personnel we need to Indonesia, to get those vaccines rolled out in Indonesia, to help the Indonesians get it under control. And then when the borders are open, have more facilities at our borders here. I mean, we had health officials, biosecurity officials in Australia saying, look, we're going to rule out foot baths. We think they're too inconvenient to travellers. Now, I think farmers watching tonight would say, bugger that, put the baths in, shut the borders, protect this billion-dollar industry.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think a lot of those measures make a lot of sense. And, you know, Murray Watt needs to not be asleep at the wheel, but be proactive and get this under control. That's your job, mate.
Yeah, it's a big test. Peter Gleeson, thank you.